So what he's telling us here is that before we can try to build unity for liberation amongst the people, people must first, of course, gain their full realization that they are individuals, and they must sever their connection with any mystification or mythification where their identities are fixed. So we also learn that the cultural action aimed at creating the unity of the oppressed must also be attentive to the specificities of the oppressed people. He starts this discussion already with the particular experiences of Latin American peasants. Now, according to Freire, these peasants are in a closed reality. That is the reference to the word they have. So first, through critical pedagogy and cultural action, which of course is praxis of critical pedagogy, we must open that word. We must sever their connection to all the mythical and mystical views of life that they might have internalized. Then we must understand that the nature of oppression for the urban subproletariat or oppressed is different as compared to the rural oppressed. So if the rural oppressed are part of a plantation, they have a centralized figure who controls their lives. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they think that is the seat of their oppression, because they are so close to the source of power that controls their lives, and since they think of their life as natural, they may not even see it as an oppressive situation. And that's where first the consciousness of self as individuals comes, and then the class consciousness of being in this oppressive relationship with this visible master figure. Now, in the urban nature of the oppression, what he's talking about is that people are oppressed through various loci of power. And those webs, those systems of power are mostly invisible, but they still control people's lives. So what that tells us is that the collective action, cultural action, in trying to build unity of the oppressed would depend upon where we are. We cannot just use the same modalities and same methods that we have used in rural parts ipso facto in the urban struggle. And that particularity needs to be absolutely kept in mind. The end of the revolutionary praxis is the same, liberation of the people. But the methods might vary depending on where we are. So overall, what we have learned then is that in case of Latin America, especially rural parts, before we try to develop a class consciousness and a class unity, the first step before that would be to develop individual consciousness for the peasants. Now remember, in one of the previous chapters, in one of the footnotes, I talked about this, that Freire points out that the situation is so dehumanizing that some peasants sell themselves into slavery to make a living without realizing that what they are doing is a dehumanizing practice for themselves. So that's the level of dehumanizing that he's talking about. So overall, by now then, in his explanation of the dialogical modes of resistance, which he offers against the anti-dialogical modes of oppression, we talked about cooperation, which was the first one, and how to build that. And we are now finishing discussing the unity for liberation or unity of liberation. One thing that he's cautioning us again and again is not to rely on empty sloganeering, right? On just blah, or on just, we're going to change the things, come with us. People cannot just be led into a revolutionary praxis by the leaders, by the promises of the leaders, or by their slogans. People must prepare themselves, must discover themselves, must be ready, and then with cooperation between the leaders and the people, where the leaders don't ever try to say that they know better, where they are led by the people, a people who have already discovered the nature of their oppression. That is the subtle balance absolutely necessary to change things for the better, to destroy the oppressive order and to replace it with a more egalitarian, just, and compassionate order.